Here I would like to talk about division, isolation and polarization of communities in perpetuation of any conflict, especially ethnic or religious conflicts. And this actually was initially published in 2004 by me in this book. In a group like this, where there are different ethnic groups, we call it a community which is multi-ethnic, or in other words, it's an integrated group of people. But you can cause division within this community, and this division is usually due to mistrust of each other between different community groups. Language differences also causes division, and then the dress such as the burqa will also cause division because people start mistrusting the other community. Then if people start boycotting institutions like shops or social meetings or social gatherings, if people boycott and don't attend that group, these two groups there will be division within this community. However, when this happens, these people will get moved out, at least socially, not necessarily geographically, but they could also come in, get isolated in a way that they might be geographically isolated. So, it may be social isolation or geographical isolation. Communication also could be isolated by media restrictions, especially when there is geographic isolation, as what we saw in the LTT conflict, where we had two isolated groups, geographically, socially, and also maybe economically separated out. So, what could happen is, when we have an isolated group like that, a radical group can come in. These are extremist radical groups who, in other words, could be called terrorists. When this sort of group, it's a small group in that one community that emerge, which leads to attacks on a large number of innocent people in the other community, such as bombings, destructions, burning, and so on, as what we saw recently. When that happens, in the second group, you get people who get agitated. They are angry, they want revenge, they are vengeful, and angry mobs from these groups could attack the first group, especially the innocent or the people who are not involved. Some of them may be, some of them may not be involved, and in that again we saw destruction, burning, looting, and so on and so forth. And the flames of this will lead to polarization of societies, and these two groups again will be polarized, and it may come to a stage where we can't go back in terms of reconciliation, because we are so angry with each other. And when you have polarized groups, and that's exactly what the extremist radical groups want. The only way that their radical groups can grow is by polarizing their community or their society with the other group. And then they will grow, and in that community there will be more sympathizers. And then what will happen is, there will be further attacks on the first group with bombs and other attacks that would increase the radical views of the first group, and reconciliation becomes impossible. And then, of course, if they can't personally attack, they can get other people to attack these groups as such what we saw in the north and east, where innocent villages were sometimes bombed through anger because a village was destroyed or because priests were killed or so on and so forth. And then the whole society will start burning, and there would not be much of an end to that. I am taking another situation in a different context, where this is Middle East, because that is what is happening in the Middle East today. And all it takes is a bomb to fall on these kids, and the amount of sorrow, the amount of anger, the revenge and the vengeance that is created in the minds of these people. And this is another picture of what we saw in the north and east. And then children and youth who face trauma, especially war trauma, could end up with PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. When that happens, together with a process of indoctrination by the radical groups, which will especially address children and youth, because indoctrination is best done with youth. And then the war will flame up. You get child soldiers who face violence, more and more violence, and therefore they develop more and more PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, and then the vicious cycle will go on. And then what will happen is there will be more and more conflict, and then the whole society again in flames. At the same time, we have to think and know about the manipulation of violence. We know that powerful nations want to sell guns and ammunition, because that is one of their main income earners, and there is very little labor and cost is very little compared to something like agriculture or animal husbandry and the profits that you get from food products or industrial products. This is very easy, high profit margins, and a large amount of their per capita income is based on this. And then they create, the powerful nations create and fund what are called proxy wars. Proxy means not in their country, but a war, their war in another country, in the Middle East, in Sri Lanka, in Indonesia, maybe Philippines, whatever the country, or Africa. They create the wars and fight. They get the local militants who are also maybe funded by them at the beginning, and then governments are also funded, and then ultimately people have to buy arms from them as well anyway. And then that leads to, of course, the youth have to be involved, and it weakens our nations. Our nation will become weaker economically, socially, and in many ways. And then the Western countries or the powerful countries will have more power to control us, because we will be on our knees. And this illustrates how people shout for freedom, but is being manipulated by somebody on top. I think it's important that we understand this process. I will illustrate it further. If you have local militants and suicide cadres, they are manipulated by a group or militant group who may not be seen. But at the same time, there will be another puppeteer on top, may or may not be. I am not saying definitely, but maybe local politicians can be involved, and they may be hidden politicians, I don't know. That is what happens in most of the instances where there are conflicts like this. And then the international conflicts, the international power players, the people who manufacture arms and have high profit earnings, and or people who want more conflict for their own benefit. And then again some people who want to sell their arms, which means again these people sell arms back into this vicious cycle. So we are coming back to a burning country. And if we polarize, if our communities get polarized, what happens is we have justification for extremism because we are polarized. We justify it. We say, yes, that is good because of that. Or the other side says, yeah, that is good because of this, and so on and so forth. And therefore, it's important to realize that persistence of conflict would depend on the success or geographic and social polarization of communities.